The Interview. I am Sara Pressler. This is Pregame, and this is where I interview some of my favorite creators, innovators, game changers, and firefighters. Today we are welcoming my client, my friend, my chief, Sara Boone. She is the fire chief of Portland Fire and Rescue, has an incredible story, and is an amazing leader. So I can't wait for you to meet her. Let's welcome Chief Sara Boone.
Thank you, Sue. Wonderful to be and to join you in this Zoom podcast.
Awesome. Well, let's start with the beginning, just a little professional background. You have been in the fire department for, I think, 2.5 decades, and you became the fire chief around this time last year. And you've had quite the first year. Tell us about some of the challenges you have faced that have been extremely unique in just your first year of having that head spot.
Yeah, well, one of the values of the fire service is we do everything as a team. And so the challenge, even though I lead this organization in this bureau, and we've gone through some of the worst times, there's comfort in the fact that I don't stand alone. I have an excellent core leadership team that we work together to face these challenges. But I will say, if you're to tell me as a first-year chief, trying to find my footing, and then less than 6 months, you have once-in-a-century pandemic that comes through with no vaccine and no containment, there was just a crushing worry of how do we stop this? How do we protect our people? And how do we still serve the community? I could tell you that the number one priority for me, being responsible for critical infrastructure, is ensuring that none of our fire stations got shut down because COVID swept through our workforce. The economic fallout was just another wave of how do we rise to the challenge and the budget cut that we had to take going into this current year. And that's on the top of, wage freezes, furloughs, and you still had to perform. And then the civil unrest. It was also crushing to our employees and anybody, not only on a personal level for me, but also for our employees who are Black, people of color, Indigenous. There is another deeper level of trauma, but you still have to come to work and perform because people still need your service. So how do you provide that space to grieve and yet still do your job because other people need you? And then when you think you're at the lowest of the low, you have a historic wind event. It's a dry season, it hasn't rained, high probability of fire, and then you have an unprecedented wildfire season to cap it off. So it has been extraordinary, exhausting, but also personally seeing just the best and how our bureau comes together and rises to the occasion, because we can't quit.
What do you see as your responsibility as a leader when your team is going through such difficult situations?
I will say historically, and I'm just going to use this as how people can identify. Usually, you will look at history and you'll see the stoic leader. Look at what Hollywood presents as this strong, nothing affects you, John Wayne type or military type. It's just that hardened leader that can walk through fire and do everything, right? I think what has changed and what people have to realize for me as a leader and as women step into leadership roles is you have to also be vulnerable. You have to meet people where they're suffering. And in order to do that, you have to understand vulnerability, trauma, pain and be okay. And so as a leader, they will see me show up every single day. I will put my life on the line for anyone. But at the same time, they also have to know it's okay to show emotion. For men, it's mostly anger. For women, sometimes I've been on my knees wondering how we're going to get through. They've seen me cry. And this is my inner circle of trust. And so by seeing me lead and show up every day, but know how it's affected me as a person, and also being able to release those emotions because they're so toxic, and having the space for compassion, that's helped us move forward. So my leadership is still strength, compassion, vulnerability, but we still rise.
So you started out with the department how many years ago?
25 years ago.
Wow. And you grew up in Portland?
Yes, yes. So my story, I will go back even further than that, just because of the time frame that we're in today, as we're moving towards racial equality and social justice. I was born in 1969. I was born to a single mother, 16-year-old, out of Oakland, California. She gave me up for adoption just because I believe she wanted a better life for her child. I entered the California Social Services, and it was a family from Portland that my adoptive father, was stationed down in Alameda County. He was in the military, but my mother really wanted to provide a chance for at-risk children. And so I was adopted, moved to Portland. They moved back to Portland, and this has been my home ever since. Raised in Portland, 3 generations of my adoptive family have lived in Oregon, all throughout the state. Went to grade school, high school here, went off to college, but I always knew in my heart that I wanted to come home to Portland and give back to the next generation.
What are some of the values that you think you got growing up in Portland? Because, you and I share this. I was born in California too. We moved, my family moved to Portland when I was 10 years old. But, also to people outside of Portland, they think of Portland, well, these days as this crazy anarchist state, which it's not, or as a place where there are no Black people, which clearly is not true. But, we both grew up in white families in Portland in the 80s. And, how did that affect you, and what values do you think were instilled in you from growing up in the Portland area?
Yeah, well, I will say growing up, it just depends on how consciously aware you become as you go through your formative years and grow into adulthood. And so I'll say my values started with my family first. And I feel that my mother, she's my greatest hero, was on the forefront when it came to civil rights. As a white woman, she cared about civil rights. She cared about women's rights. She cared about the environment. She marched in the 60s. So her values, I really internalized as a young age. And that she also shaped my values in the schools she selected. For me and my brother growing up, education was important to her. Diversity was important to her. So I was fortunate to go to a small, private, liberal grade school, St. Francis of Assisi. The school is closed, but the church still operates as a soup kitchen and place for the houseless. And so going to school at St. Francis of Assisi instilled other values to me as a young person, to see the world outside my own self-interest, where we did a lot of volunteer work. St. Francis was the patron saint of animals. So I really have a care and a heart for pets, animals, just all human life, really, and all life. And then as, you know, I grew up and continued, you look at the neighborhoods, they were small. Um, they were mixed. I grew up in a blue collar home. So there was a lot of diversity in our neighborhoods. There was a lot of culture. Artists were supported. So it was really eclectic in a way. But, you know, that was more lower, probably middle class to lower blue collar working neighborhoods. And then also just with my friends, going over to neighbors' houses, it just seemed as a community, people looked out for each other. So that's the Portland I remember. And also going into high school, it's my teachers, it's the mentors, it's the people that you meet in the neighborhood that, you know, help you and encourage you on your path wherever you're going. And you may not know where that is, but they were there. And I still see that in Portland. I still see that ethos. Even as we go through these challenging times, and a lot of what you see is a reaction to what's being put out at the highest level. But I have to remind people, even in the 80s, when you look at Oregon and Portland, you know, the Pacific Northwest is known for having neo-Nazis and skinheads. And, you know, it was in the 80s that, you know, we had Ron Metzger, and we had the killing of, I think it was a Pakistani student by neo-Nazis and skinheads. So race and white supremacy, it was still around in the 80s, but I just like today, I'm sure young kids, there are areas of Portland that people feel safe, protected, and it's a wonderful place to live.
So with all of that diversity growing up, both of people and of ideas, topics, art, like you mentioned, what made you choose the fire department?
Yeah, well, I hadn't chosen the fire department at the time. It wasn't even on my radar. And I think as for me, as a young person, and all young people, we kind of search and question what's our true purpose. And for me, I know the books that I read, I was really drawn to leaders, compassionate leaders, and figures that served others, whether it's Gandhi, whether it's Mother Teresa, Barbara Jordan, people that just broke barriers and not only taught you how to serve, but really made you think on a deep level when it comes to compassion. So one of the things in my heart, I always knew I wanted to come back to Portland, and I always knew I wanted to give back to the next generation. And I think as a young Black girl growing up in Portland, and young kids face, you get put in a box and defined and limited on what you can do or what society believes you can do. My mother always wanted me to aspire to think that I could do anything I put my mind to. And so it is that encouragement that goes against the grain. I wanted to give back to young kids, no matter what their background was. I wanted to inspire them to think they could be more than what society tells them. And so it was really important. I focused on education, came back, went to Boise State, got my degree in secondary education, wanted to get involved in coaching, sports, PE, high school PE. But as I was doing my student teaching, it almost seemed like it was incomplete. Where I was living out what I wanted to do, but there still was something I wasn't satisfied with myself personally. I missed, as an athlete, I missed being competitive. I missed pushing myself physically to the limit. And I will say one day, as I was going through my student teaching, within that time frame, a fire inspector was going through Marshall High School and doing a fire inspection, looking at extinguishers. He was down in the girls' locker room. We struck up a conversation, and as friendly as I am, and as friendly as fire inspectors are, we just had a great conversation, and he sparked the interest of another path, which was the fire service. And just hearing my mom's voice in the back of my head, you can do anything that you put your mind to. I was really drawn to what this inspector had said. And I thought, that's my calling. That's what I thought, didn't know if it was going to work out, but I went through the testing process. And if it was meant to be, I thought, I'll stay on this path. And that's how I got into the fire service and never looked back.
So when you came in, what did the fire service look like? I know for a lot of us, our stereotype of a firefighter is, a young white guy.
Well, it looked like Portland.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what people have to realize. The fire service isn't any different than the city of Portland. It's a microcosm, of the state of Oregon, as well as the city of Portland, the metro region. I don't know if the numbers have moved so much when you look at the census data and the population when it comes to diversity in the city. But there was diversity, and I was plugged into that. And so I guess for me, I was fortunate to walk in two different worlds. Right? As a Black woman, I can identify with oppression and racism on a daily basis. As a female, I understand what it is to be marginalized on a daily basis. So I will say, when we talk about the fire service and the fire bureau, I am somebody who, to me, that just seemed reflective of the demographics of Portland and Oregon. Now that can be shocking for other people coming from, the East Coast and the South. But for me, it wasn't a barrier. But I will say the biggest barrier going into the fire service, even though it was predominantly white, predominantly male, is I was coming in at a time where the age gap, there was a huge difference. And so people stay in the fire service for 25 years, and we came in at a time where there were a lot of older men. And so coming in as a young 25-year-old, single Black female, the only Black female into majority white male and older work environment, it was tough. But it was generationally tough because a lot of the men had never gone to school with women or with Black kids, right? So it's all about breaking down barriers, building relationships, establishing trust, and working as a team. And that's what the fire service has taught me.
Do you see those demographics changing now? I know we'll get to this, but I know part of the goals of the fire department over the next few years is recruitment and bringing more diversity at that entry level.
Yeah, this one's a tough one for me. I have been out in the community every single year since I've been here, advocating for the fire service, as well as, just trying to plant that seed into young kids that this is a viable career. I don't know all the barriers as far as why we haven't been able to establish trust in communities, underrepresented communities, where they think this is a great opportunity. I will tell people the history of the fire service is rooted in volunteerism, and that is another Portland thing. Look at how many nonprofits we have, and people spin up for activism and gather together for a common cause and try to help people. That is the essence of the fire service. It is before there was a paid, before that the town was established and you had a paid fire department, people volunteered to neighbor helping neighbor. And that is the one thing, if I could get back to the heart of the fire service, especially in city fire departments, that once it became paid, then all of a sudden you had qualifications, then all of a sudden you had discriminatory laws, then all of a sudden it's who can come into the service and who can't. Those barriers have been taken down. And now anybody has the opportunity to step through. And one thing, if Portland's going to move forward, especially with some of the larger challenges that we face, potential earthquake, wildland fires in the urban interface, healthcare, it is neighbor taking care of neighbor. And there's no better way than people coming from the community and stepping into an organization like the fire service, not only so you can serve your community, but also when you go home as a neighbor, just talking to the kids on the block, the families on the block, the stores that you go to, the parks and the events that you attend. You are always there, immersed in community. And that's what I would like to get back to. So it is going to be a challenge. I have to overcome just the narrative of, it's even though it's predominantly white male, we are making headways. But this is a bureau. No matter who you are or your background, you're still expected to come in, be able to build relationships, be a part of a team, and accomplish a common goal.
Well, and to mention, the fire marshal is a woman in Portland's fire department. I met a station captain who is a woman in working with you guys. So, I saw diversity in meeting you in this short window, you and your team. So I do think there are people there and leading with, I think not just technical intelligence, but emotional intelligence is going to set the tone.
Yeah, and we also have to prioritize and have to have the, backing of city council. And I will say, and I'm going back in history and how we got in, and this was under Mayor Katz, but it was a handful of Black male firefighters that realized that they were going to be retiring soon, and they wanted to be able to replace the numbers. And so there was a push, a collective effort supported by the city where they started an apprenticeship program, because I will say one of the barriers is probably getting a EMT basic medical certification through the state of Oregon. Well, in order to extend this opportunity into the communities and to diversify, if one of the barriers is, affordability and access to education, that was the one thing the apprenticeship program did. The city funded that and paid for us to get the skill set, to get our EMT basic license, as well as training to step into the fire service. And it was a 6-month program. It was specific and geared towards underrepresented groups. And we are a product of that investment. And we had the largest group that was the most diverse. And after 25 years, because of that effort, you're seeing in the first time in Portland's history, and probably the state of Oregon, which is over 130 years, that a woman of color has stepped into the leadership. Our fire marshal is a female. You look at, if you were to look at my core team in the demographics, you also have representation across the board when it comes to race. But at the same time, I also want to caution that we came in as a generation where barriers had been removed already, where, access to, education. College was affordable. We had opportunities that this generation is losing. And we also see civil rights being rolled back. So unfortunately, I will say Generation X was in a period where the previous generations have really had fought to remove a lot of the legal hurdles, the discriminatory practices, and barriers that provided us opportunity. And we stepped through and we rose to that challenge, and we made, we didn't waste that opportunity, but now we have to, undo a lot of the things that are being rolled back today.
As we said before we started recording today, I just can't believe how expensive a four-year college is now, even state schools. And I hope that some of the events of this year will help people look back at other options for career training. College is an awesome experience, but trade school is an excellent way to go. Going through the fire department training, an amazing way to go, where you have so much more job security than you would have with most liberal arts education. And so, my hope is that people will look more broadly at what their career options are.
Yeah, I will say as young adults are going into graduating high school, my parents didn't give me an option to go into trades. They were adamant that I was going to get a college degree, and then I could decide what I wanted to do afterwards. This is a different generation to a certain extent, where I don't, if I were to look back and say, had this opportunity, if it were afforded to me in high school, or if the seed was planted in grade school, what would my path look like, right? I probably would have pursued, if it captured my heart and resonated, most likely I probably wouldn't have gone to, to a four-year school. That's what I think in my mind. I know my parents said, no, so you're still going. So I come from the place that education is important. It just opens doors. Even if you take a path like the fire service and you come in as a firefighter, there's skill sets and things that you learn as you move from firefighting into administration. So that, I guess I would be grateful, and it would be no different if somebody entered a trade, and they decided as they got older that maybe they didn't want to be on the front line, whatever work they chose, and they wanted to move up into a supervisory position or management position.
Well, let's talk about making that shift from firefighting to running the fire department. That's something that happens a lot in pregame. A lot of the people we work with, maybe they worked for a company and now they're running a company, or they did a job for many years and now they've started their own business or their own practice, and they're running the business of the thing, not just doing the thing every day. So that's it's still a skill that you need, whether you are going into leadership in the private sector or the public sector. So what have been some of the skills you've had to brush up on, or just differences in perspective you've had to take as you've moved up into leadership?
Yeah, the one thing I will say for anybody that steps into a leadership role is you really have to know yourself first, because you are going to get pulled in so many different directions. And sometimes you'll cater because you want to just be liked. You don't want to rock the boat. But knowing myself and the challenges coming in and really understanding who I am, having a strong foundation of my values, that has helped in a leadership position. I can say as a firefighter, when it comes to first coming into this organization, I really wanted to be liked to a certain extent. But when you step into a supervisor, management, or upper executive, you really have to understand the importance of the mission of your organization, who you're serving, what it's there for, the fiscal responsibility, especially for us being taxpayer funded, and ensuring that everybody collectively buys into the values in which that organization is grounded in. So I will say people skills, you take that to, I mean, those have helped me out throughout team building, conflict resolution, interpersonal skills, emotional intelligence, all of those things. I do know I did get in college, not just going to class and taking courses, but you are in class with people from all across the nation and potentially across the world that you have to learn about others. And so that's something that's helped me at the executive level, as well as I spent my career when it comes to technical proficiency, and have worked pretty much every position in this bureau, from firefighter to officer, being on an engine, being on a truck, being downtown, being uptown in the neighborhood, being in training, doing staffing for the whole city, being an operations chief, a logistics chief, a training chief, a safety chief. So it has given me a perspective to understand this bureau, not from one point of view or a limited point of view, but how every division within Portland Fire and how it's integrated. And you can't just look at the emergency response side and let the other divisions fall short. And so whether it's business operations, logistical support, the training of firefighters in order to perform, I would say being in this executive role is understanding how everything has to integrate and work seamlessly, even though people only see the engines and trucks and firefighters stepping off the rig. And if you don't have an understanding of your entire organization and how it operates, you're going to be hampered. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just, you know, you and I met a year ago, and I have learned so much about the fire department. You know, being a civilian, being somebody who is just out in the community, you know, yeah, you just see the fire trucks. You don't realize, oh, wow, they're going around inspecting buildings all the time. There's so much prevention that's happening, not just emergency response. And then there's the whole team of people in administration making sure everything runs properly. It's really mind-blowing how much you do and how much you are expected to know.
Yeah. And I want people to understand too, the one thing in the fire service that has changed and is really, really hard, even with implementing and using technology to advance and drive your operations. Obviously, data helps tremendously, where we can understand the gaps in our services, prioritize investments in order to achieve our goals, a whole host of things. But I do know what I have seen with this workforce is we can't keep up with the pace of the digital era, whether it's emails, whether it's texts, whether it's, it helps in certain areas, but in other areas, we're about connecting with humans on a personal level who have suffered and are traumatized. And that requires time. But we are being conditioned to work at a pace of, you know, how fast the computer processes information, how many emails you can read in a day. And we are losing that human connection and team building skills, just the basic values of humanity. and caring for each other. And I see a little bit of breakdown when it comes to team dynamics because the time is not there to build those bonds, because you're always, the information is coming in extraordinarily fast and with a lot of volume. And so the demand in so many different ways that people can access you. And as firefighters and just as people that want to be high achievers, you want to constantly finish every single email, or you want to answer every single demand, or you want to be able to, but at the same time, it is breaking us down as human beings. So for me, it is understanding how technology can really drive your purpose, your mission, and accomplish your goals. But for us as a fire service, I also need to build space and time within the day and pull supervisors away from computers and have them interact and get to know each other, because we spend more time with our smartphones, our tablets, our computers and laptops than we do with each other. And so that's the challenge I'm trying to do within the Fire Bureau, is building capacity for recovery.
Well, and we're all dealing with that because you have staff working from home still because of COVID. And, every organization is trying to figure out right now, how do we balance technology so that we're not being dragged along by our tech, but the tech is truly supporting us in our work and our mission.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it on a daily basis when it comes to the political level as well as the bureaus, is how fast can you get out a social media message? The complaints come in, you see a tweet, you see something on your Facebook posts, and when I came in, we had maybe one person as our public information officer, and now we have a whole communications team, just right for outward facing social media, as well as to connect with radio and TV and written, and it's just one of those things, is we don't lurch towards because you read a tweet here or somebody posts a Facebook there, but that just seems to be how social media has really driven the narrative and can really impact and influence people's self-worth, psychology, and emotions. And so again, I will just say, for the Fire Bureau, I can't control, if people want to jump on that platform, but at the same time, I have to center people back to the core values of who we are and what the mission is, and build on how you're able to relate to others, how you're able to see a situation from somebody else's perspective. We have a unique position that we don't get to pick and choose who we serve. And so we see the worst of human suffering. And I know for us and for the city to come together and to help, especially our most vulnerable population, is to really listen and be able to understand where the lack of service or how we can help. But I will say Portland Fire is a connection, whether it's with community organizations, nonprofits, or helping to connect the most vulnerable with the most appropriate services. But again, that's not on a social media platform. That's just on a day-to-day human response and connection.
So on top of everything you had to learn onboarding in your role as the chief in the last year, you got saddled with an executive coach, which was me. For people who maybe haven't had a coach, or I think it's a different thought that somebody in the public sector might be working with a coach. how is that helpful to you in your role?
You've been extraordinarily helpful to me because I will say, even though I have a team that I trust, that's the first thing you got to do in as an executive and leadership is build that team. Because if you don't have the right team, you're never going to, I mean, the working environment will be tough. And I have I believe, an amazing team. But even with that, there are things that as leaders, emotionally on the political side, that you can't just bare your soul to your team, but it is a lonely place. And the one thing when it came to pregame and Ciara, you helped me keep in alignment of what the organizational values are and how my personal values align with that, and how that the mission, how I connect with even a higher level when it comes to elected and political, because government is messy. And you have been wonderful when you send me back on clarity. You know, what are we facing going into the future? What are our values? What are our organizational values? And how are you bringing people back to those values when it comes to, you know, messaging, when it comes to programs, when it comes to your intention? So you've really grounded me as my moral compass.
Thank you. So for the last 4 months, I've had the privilege of working with you and your team on building out the strategic plan for 2020 through 2023. And so as of, you know, next week, next month, you'll be presenting a refreshed set of values, a mission and vision. What are some of your hopes for the fire department over the next 3 years, and how you serve Portland?
Yeah. One of the things that was important to me is there's been somewhat of a disconnect. The city is really good at planning, has plans for everything you can think of. But how do the bureaus connect with the city's overarching goals and the big challenges they face going into the future? And the one thing for this city, the city of Portland, equity is front and center. Equity in services in order to close the disparities and improve the outcomes of people who have been historically marginalized, because there hasn't been a fair playing field. So our purpose, or my goal, was to really be able to fit Portland Fire's 3-year strategic plan and have the foundation of the city's overarching principles and vision to be embedded within that, and how we can provide services that really we understand the inequities, not only of the communities and the disparities. How do we close that gap? How do we tailor our services? Who do we partner with? Who do we collaborate with in order to achieve some of the city's overarching goals? And so for me, it's not just looking at response time and you incorporate national best practices, but it is workplace culture, right? It is my generation that came in because prior to the 1980s, women weren't allowed to be firefighters. So we have a workplace culture where even though the legal barriers have come down, we still are trying to have our agency within a majority male workforce. And then how do we, which again, it's not just women, it's people of color. So the outcomes and what we see today were because of intentional policies and laws 50 years ago. So we are the first generation that has come in and having to create a new working culture where people feel valued, people feel a part of the team, people can have their own identity, and that they will thrive. And that is a challenge, but it is something that we are focused on. We look at what's the biggest crisis today? Well, it's healthcare. Many of the calls we go on, chronic health issues, mental health issues, and substance use abuse. These are three big health issues impacting the quality of life. Chronic health issues are preventable, right? You look at houselessness and just mental illness and not having the appropriate services, but that we respond. And so if we're responding, how can we partner? And this is where the commissioners come in to provide a more appropriate response model, right? And then how can we use our response data in a way to address and intervene with more appropriate services prior to us responding. That's where the prevention side comes in. So, being a partnership when it comes to preventative measures to address chronic illness or chronic health impacts, as well as connecting within a pre-hospital setting where we can connect people with the right resources instead of having to take somebody to the ER if they don't need to go because it's not a critical medical emergency, or as the commissioner wants, you don't have to send police. So that is a big thing, community health for us, not only building out a preventative model, but also a more appropriate response model. Sustainable practices. In the fire service, you look to the future and we can change when it comes to our vehicles, as well as our engines and apparatus. So we have looked all across the world at new technology and trying to transition from diesel-powered fire engines to hybrid electric, as well as for our SUVs and fleet vehicles. So sustainable practices, workplace culture, community health. These are all huge priorities, as well as core services.
I want to clarify, your premise is that if we can learn within a department how to treat each other with respect in regards to our differences, diversifying that culture, treating people of color with respect, treating women with respect, that affects when you go out into the community in an emergency response situation, making these snap judgments, it affects the quality of care and service that the department can provide for the public.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. But there is something that people have to understand. For us, when it comes to service and what the traditional service was, when somebody called 911, you had a limited amount of time to live. Somebody had a heart attack, somebody's house was on fire and they needed to be rescued. There was a hazardous materials leak that people had to be evacuated or they were going to be incapacitated. That is the bare essence of 911. You have a place to call, a point answering service. Dispatchers answer the call, or call takers answer the call. Dispatchers get out the call. It gets sent to the fire station, fire, police, medical, and we are out the door responding. It is our protocols, it is our training, and it is getting on scene and intervening to change the outcome between whether somebody lives or dies. AMR comes in, the county has a contract to transport. They get to the hospital within 10 minutes. You're on the operating table and your life is safe. That is the essence of the 911 system. So we follow and standardize protocols that we apply to all situations. And we really don't have time to talk, right? We're focused. The majority of our calls today, because of other systems that are not in place, has really required us to change our model. We still have to go on the critical calls. We still have to work on their standard protocol that gets applied to everybody. But on the preventative side, on the chronic health side, on the mental health side, on where people aren't even having their basic needs met, that requires that now you have to be human, right? Not compartmentalize your emotion. Now you have to be able to interact. Now you have to be able to see the world from a different perspective. Now you have to understand whether, whatever it is, whoever is suffering, you have to be able to provide compassion. And not only time and patience in treating the symptom, but understand that there's a whole other level of trauma around of what a person has experienced or their family has experienced. That's what we have to teach, and that's what we're trying to grow.
So as we wrap up here, I will ask you one of our favorite pregame questions. On a personal level, on a professional level, how do you define success?
How do you define success? I will say how I define success probably would be creature comforts. But I walk and live in the world of death and the worst of tragedy and suffering. So I will define success, not only on the human level, is if we are healthy and happy ourselves and find what ails us. And if we can also extend that to others, because that is the human condition. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't even matter what position you're in. We are a society that is very sick right now, and it is called human suffering. And until we relate on a human level, which is on a personal level, and seeing each other within each other in the same struggle, that's how you measure success. And you have to start with the people that are suffering most. So just because I'm in this position, that's great. That's a personal achievement. But when I look at this city and I come to work every day and I see the amount of suffering that we can prevent if we just reprioritize and shift and start putting humans over profit, and connecting on that human level, because we're in a humanitarian crisis right now. Success to me is when everybody has the opportunity to rise together.
Sara Boone, thank you so much for your time. I know it's very precious, and I am so grateful you're part of the Pregame family and now a friend. And with that, let's everyone thank Sara for being here with us today.
I spit it cold like